Okay, welcome to today's video. So today's video is going to be a little bit more mobile than normal because I'm going to be moving around the rat room a bit to show you a few different things. Today's topic is on adapting cage setups for disabled or kind of elderly rats, basically rats with restricted mobility in some form or other. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the kinds of setups you can do and why you would choose to do that and when you would choose each. So first thing on that is to think about what kind of conditions would cause you to kind of limited mobility in a rat. Some of the classic ones at the more minor end are things like a head tilt, so where a rat has an ear infection or something and it leaves it often with a permanent head tilt, so it's a bit dizzy, a bit wobbly around, falls over a lot. If you've ever seen any of my videos with Diddy formerly had a head tilt, so she walks around with her head a bit like that and she sometimes rolls over and her balance is a bit rubbish, to be honest. You can also have problems where a rat is particularly clumsy, or a rat that's had a previous injury which means it's clumsy. So I had a rat once that broke a tail and she recovered from that, but she was always a little bit kind of crap at balancing. So I had to watch my kind of layouts for her for quite a few years. So that's kind of minor end, and also minor levels of hind leg degeneration. So when they get a bit older, they quite often get the back legs get a bit floppy. They're a little bit kind of rubbish. They don't grip on as much. Generally, they get really strong front arms. But yeah, so that's one of the kind of minor ends. And then as you get further along, you can get more advanced HLD, so they can struggle. So HLD is hind leg degeneration, so they can struggle to climb tall or get around or move on more than one level. You can get what Diddy's currently suffering from, which is a pituitary tumour, so she's struggling to kind of lift her front body up as well as having hind leg degeneration, so she generally can't climb really anymore, though it doesn't stop her trying. And then you can get rats that get weaker and weaker and need more kind of restricted motion. Even ones that are really, really skinny but fairly capable, and I'll introduce you to one of those later on. But that need to not have to climb around enough in order to keep some weight on. And then the final kind of option that you sometimes have for kind of disabled restricted mobility is if you've got a rat that needs to be in a hospital cage for some reason. So I've currently got a girl who's got a broken leg and she's on strict cage rest, and she's on the kind of most extreme of these options, what I would call level 3. She can't be allowed to move much at all. She's about to move up actually, which is why I'm doing the video today, not later, so I can show you her cage setup. But yes, it's very much about kind of limiting the movement as much as possible for their own good and for their own healing. You sometimes do that for a short period of time after surgery, or for a longer period of time when you've got something like a break. So okay, so level 1 as I would call it, this is where you've got minor kind of mobility impairments. It's where the rat does struggle to get around a bit, but should be challenged, because by challenging them you encourage them to build up muscle in other places or to learn to adapt. If you immediately stick a rat with the first signs of HLD into a low-level cage, it's not going to use it, and you know what, it'll lose it faster. And it's there's actually some science behind that. If you ever feel like reading it, then have a read on my website of the hind leg degeneration article. I've kind of quoted some studies on how exercise can kind of keep things going. It's quite an interesting topic. So my theory, my rule that I govern things by is always try and challenge the rat as much as possible. So keep them moving as much as within their capability without causing excess chance of injury. I mean, in any cage setup there's a chance of injury. I'm in favour of active cage setups generally, so there's probably more than normal in mine, but I try and adapt it to fit the rats involved. So what we're going to have a quick look at, we're going to look at my current cage setup. So this was actually set up for a little while ago, for when Diddy was more mobile than she currently is. So I had to do this knowing that she had a kind of head tilt and she had moderate HLD, to the point where she could climb but she needed fall protection, and she also needed easy places to stop up and rest. So let's kind of get down and have you a quick tour around the cage. So first thing to notice that I always do for kind of older rats is I try and make sure that the floor area, so we have quite a decent sized floor area in the Ventura, has plenty for them to do, and should they need to, they can live there. So one of the things, it's probably not going to show it well because it's quite dark, you can see just under here is there's a little house, and that's my kind of oldie house. It's on the floor, it's nice and safe and secure, it's nice and dark in there, so they quite like it. There's plenty of floor space still for her to have a bit of a wander around. There's even pumice stone. They absolutely let's try and get that one. They absolutely love chewing pumice stones, and there's plenty of wood for her to do. And one thing I put in towards when she was getting worse before she moved out of this cage is this little ramp. So it just basically brings up the level of the wood shaving so that they can get to the water bottle very easily, because I have quite a deep tray. I did worry a little bit about Diddy. Now, she's only really been floor-based until fairly recently. A bit before that, she was actually still quite capable of getting around. So other things that you might want to notice here is we've got things like let's try and get a better angle. There's kind of a step here, and then there's another step that she can jump up here. It happens to be a water bowl. And then again, another piece here. These are all kind of resting places that she can go when she's kind of going up between climbing up the bars. And then one of the more important things that I've got here is you can see this big hammock here. Well, it's actually a sack. Again, she can get onto there and rest, and then there's like a nice easy hole here for her to get on top of the digging box, which actually she still loved up until very recently. She would be up in the digging box and climb up there, have a bit of a dig. And then the top half of the cage, because I have a mixed needs group, so I have some very agile rats too, there's a lot more going on here, and that's to provide those rats with plenty to do as well. Though to be fair, she still would get up to here, and she'd get up to the hammock at the back there, which was one of their favourites. She liked to dig around in this stuff, in the kind of litter in there. So even though this half is the active half, she would still get up there. But the key things for that were those like low steps further down and this catch hammock. And that also gave me peace of mind that if she fell off here, she could only at worst fall onto here, which is not bad. She wasn't going to fall down all the way in the cage. So that's the key things on what I call stage one, which is when the rat is capable of getting around, just needs a little bit of assistance. And one of my key tricks in doing that is I'll set the cage up, I'll put the rats in there and just sit there and watch them. And I'll watch, particularly in this case Diddy, as they try and climb around. So as I see she's struggling somewhere, I have like a little handful of kind of little perches. Just put one there. Oh right, now she can get up, let's watch her for a bit longer. And mine always want to explore the whole cage when I kind of set it up, so even the older ones will get everywhere. So then that helps me adapt it. It's all about watching their capabilities and trying to think of the different routes that we use to get around, so that works quite well. That is not for every rat, but I would say the majority of rats can cope with a decent active setup for quite a while, and it does keep them young. So now I'll take you over to where Diddy is currently staying. So a couple of weeks ago, as you probably heard if you've watched my pituitary tumour video, Diddy was diagnosed with a pituitary tumour. Her condition has deteriorated a bit in that time. She's no longer able to climb up various levels. And last week we decided to take the decision to move her in with her sister, who actually belongs to my friend over at Lovecraft Rats, Tara. Move her in with her sister, because her sister was very skinny and was just turning into a skeleton with her group of rats, even with lots of extra food. So Tara and Diddy are now a lovely old couple of sisters, and actually really happy together, but they've moved into a low-level cage. Now this cage is, let's try and get you a good view of it. This cage is in Alaska. Moving my knee out of the way. It's a cage that is too small for a permanent home for kind of a group of rats, but it's blooming useful as for this kind of thing, and for litters. I raise all my litters in there. You'll see that at some point when I have a litter again. So Diddy and Tara have moved into here, and you will be able to see them. Here's Diddy saying hello, and here's Tara, her little sister. Tara's a little bit balding, bless her. She's not a Rex, though she currently does look like a double Rex. So this cage is all about trying to make it easy for them to get around without being in too many dimensions. I don't know if you'll be able to see Diddy moving around at all, but you can see that her back legs are very kind of flat. She does move around, she's quite happy to. There you see she's pulled herself up into the kind of cube, but she can't manage much higher than this cube. She can get up onto this branch, and she can use this ramp to get into the pot, which they love sleeping in as well. And she's got a little extra water bottle here so she doesn't have to go far for a drink. It is. She's wondering why I'm not feeding her more. This is normally feeding time for them. They also have a big hammock here, and to be honest, they don't really get into this very much, but they do go in this hammock, and they love the kind of little cave that's formed underneath it. I will say I normally scatter feed right up to the very end, but these girls need far more food than I can easily provide, and they're a little bit kind of slapdash about finding it, so they do have a bowl. And one of the few times I will both bowl feed, just to make sure that they can easily find their food, because they're just not as capable anymore, bless them. Both these girls are 29 months old, so they're not young rats, but they're very, very enthusiastic about life still. So this is working out really well for them. They're both maintaining a good weight. They both clearly adore each other, which is amusing because they hadn't met each other before, well, since they were kind of 7 weeks, 8 weeks old. They hadn't seen each other, and we put them together just last week and they were immediately best friends. When you get to old lady age like these, it's not a challenging introduction most of the time, particularly so closely related as they are. So I shall leave them to continue eating their food. I must know, I don't really need the bulldog clip on this cage, but my rats are asses, so I always kind of lock it. So the final kind of option that we have for a kind of restricted mobility cage is the kind of hospital cage setup, and this is a particularly good example of it because Fing has now been in this tiny cage for 2.5 weeks. She's going stir crazy. She's a baby rat and she does not appreciate it, and it's entirely an inappropriate size as a permanent kind of cage. So this is Fing's little cage, which I'll view from the top as well so you can see the size. This is actually slightly bigger than the cage I started out on because that was it's just too small for her really. But as a cage I borrowed this from somebody else because it's just that little bit larger than my hospital cage. Fing has to be in this cage because of her broken arm. We're giving it as long as possible to kind of set, and actually it's worked. We thought she might have to have an amputation, but she's got away with it, just about. So, and today, because she's been putting so much weight on it and is doing so much better with it, I'm going to upgrade her to Alaska for, let's say, a weekish before she moves back into kind of half the big cage. But it's really good progress, so I'm really pleased with her. You can just see sometimes that she's slightly favouring that leg. She'll hold it a little bit more weakly, but the improvement's been massive. Anyway, so the hospital cage. So how you set it up really depends on the situation. So if I was having this cage and it was post-surgery and literally I sent them to the vets in the little cage, which I often do, it would have a small low house in it, rather than currently we've got kind of a hammock that they've destroyed. Small low open cage, so the vet can just lift the house out and the rats are in there. They can get in and out of it really easily, which is important when they've potentially got a wound. You don't want them to have to squeeze through a tiny gap. It would probably have vet bed on the floor, which is a kind of thick fleecy material. I'll see if I can find a bit for you. I don't have much, but I keep it in, but you can also use fleece. Just vet bed's a little bit thicker. We have some. Right, so this is vet bed. It's kind of thick, fluffy, very good at wicking moisture away, and ideal for kind of a hospital situation, which is why it's called vet bed, because they use it heavily. So that would be my kind of typical post-surgery setup. I would have the cage very clean, not very much in it, but somewhere safe for them to hide, because generally when they're at the vets they're quite stressed. It's an unpleasant environment for them. They have to be in the cage before the surgery and after the surgery, so you want them to feel secure, though after the surgery they're pretty stoned. So this is a different case though, and it's actually more similar to after, like a day after surgery, 2 days after surgery, you might start putting in a bit of substrate so it's more absorbent, they can dig in it a little bit, it's more like familiar to them. And you might put in a slightly more kind of cosy bed. I should add as well, you can use cubes rather than the houses, as long as they're easy access, easy for the rat to get in and they don't have to climb up into them. So when you're taking it a little bit further, so a situation where she has to be in this cage for a long period of time, so I have to try and entertain her without letting her move too much. So this has been the real challenge with this situation, and why I thought it was particularly useful to kind of describe the things that we're doing. So Fing is young and active, as you can see. One of the key things that I've done here is give her a friend. So I have, in her group, I've got 6 other rats, now Diddy's moved out. So what I've been doing is, every half a day, one of her cage mates spends half the day with her, and then I swap that cage mate for another cage mate, and so on. So everybody spends like half a day with her every 3 days. So she gets a change of companions. She loves playing with the other babies, but then the adults give her a bit of calm stability as well. So it's like a nice mixture for her. And it also keeps her in touch with all the group, because what I don't want to do is put her through a full intro with rats she hasn't seen for 3 weeks when I do finally kind of move her back into the cage. So this way she stays friends with everybody. She's happy with, and the different companions help give her something else to be interested in. Next thing I've done is substrate. So I've changed the type of substrate every 2 or 3 days. You need to change it a lot in this size cage anyway, because rats poo, and that is not nearly a big enough cage for rats. So what I'll do is, like I've got card at the moment, I'll put in some bed mats at another point in time. I might put in some Back to Nature, or some, my friend got some hemp chips for them when they went to stay with her, and it's just giving them different textures and smells. So that was the first thing, and that kind of adds a bit of interest. It's not great, but it's something. They've always had the little hammock house in there, which is particularly handy, even though they've like pulled one of the hooks up at the moment, because it hooks to the ceiling, and it's not high off the ground at all. Let's try and get an angle from here. So basically she doesn't have to climb to get into it. Then if you ignore the ropes and the perches, because they've gone in the last few days because she's improved, and I wanted to start to get her kind of familiar with the idea of climbing without her being able to jump on and off things really high, so it's like slowly strengthen that leg. But what we've used a lot of, so what we've got here is a little hanging treat ball thing. She's got hanging like a wooden ring here, which she occasionally bashes against the cage bars in frustration because I'm not letting her out to play. She has one of those pumice stones that I was talking about in the main cage that I put nice and low for Diddy to chew. They do love chewing that, so that helps keep them busy. What we've also done regularly, in fact I've got a selection of bits and pieces, is change what's in there. So every 2 or 3 days we'll put in something new. So like it could be as simple as, here's a little treat dispenser. They quite like chewing and destroying those. Bits of bark, I use it in the digging box. Random bits of rope, so it's a different texture, it's something she can play with and interact with. Even down to your good old drinking straws. They love kind of attacking those, as Mog is currently demonstrating. But in the cage they will kind of have a good chew too. That is going to be an X straw very, very quickly. As you can see, they're having a good game with it. Rats don't need expensive toys. Here's another kind of like wooden chew ring. It's basically anything, blocks and such, anything that's kind of different textures. And what I would do regularly as well is stuck in a load of paper or shredded newspaper, or something I'd call like newspaper curtains, where you tear strips in it but keep it together at the top and poke it through the bar so they have to tear it off themselves. So all this is small things that we can do to help her to keep her entertained, and probably the key thing is changing them. So she'll get used to it one day, and then I'll change it around so she'll have something new to explore. It's still crap, it's still small, but this way it's kind of more, you know, it keeps her just that little bit happier, mentally stimulated at her age, which is only 5 months old. She needs everything that she can get, and I'm actually really glad that I can upgrade her today. So she'll be going into a cage the size of Diddy's. The main differences will be, I'll still keep it low to start with and build it up, but I'm going to put a wheel in there, because by running she's going to kind of exercise it without kind of putting a lot of force on it. So when they're kind of jumping from heights and landing on it, I don't want to do that because that could still splinter it, but I wanted to start exercising it more, and then I'll slowly build her up until she's back in that full cage that you saw earlier. So those are the main things that I wanted to cover on this. It's that idea that it isn't just one solution. So your rat has limited mobility does not mean that it has to go straight into a small single level cage like Diddy and Terra are currently living in. The idea that you can adapt your current cage, particularly where you've got a mixed age group, and how you can kind of think about using perches and stable spots and places where they can stop off and rest on the way, and as well as fall stoppers, so that there's no long drops for a rat. You shouldn't have long drops anyway, but for a rat that's struggling with mobility, it's more important than most. And then looking at how we can make the most of a flat setup when it does come to that. So lots of different sleeping spots like you saw for Terra and Diddy. Again, I spent a bit of time watching them get around, making sure that they could make use of the cage. Thinking about using a bowl in that situation where you might normally scatter feed if the rats need that. I'd always try it. Try scatter feeding it. If they're still getting skinny on that, then put it in a bowl and they can always find it. You can still scatter a bit around just for interest. To be honest, they scatter it themselves. And then we get on to where you need to really restrict mobility and how you can make the most of that, the kind of small cage, and how you can use kind of alternating simple things to try and keep rats entertained. I will say I still scatter to them because they're more than capable. Even when she had a broken leg and she could only use one paw, she was more than capable of eating her dinner in that little cage with one paw, having dug it up, and pushed her mum usually out of the way. She's a little Spitfire-ish thing. I'm really glad that she's kind of healing so well. Anyway, I best get off and set her up in her new cage, and I might film it as a bit of a part. I'm working on one about sprains and breaks at the moment, a video, so I might film a little bit for that so you guys can see just how happy she is. So watch this space for that video, and thank you very much.